If you haven't heard yet, I just launched Future of Work Leaders, a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you are interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Seth Godin, usually doesn't need much of an introduction. It's his third or fourth time on the show. But for those of you not familiar with Seth, he's an entrepreneur, best-selling author, speaker. In addition to launching one of the most popular blogs in the world, he has 22 books that he's published, although I think with this new one, it'll be 22. And his books include The Dip, Linchpin, Purple Cow, which I remember reading back when I was in college many, many years ago. And his most recent book, which is called This Is Strategy, coming out October 22nd. Seth, thank you for joining me.
Well, the podcast has such a good name because no matter what we do, the future keeps showing up.
Yeah, I've gone through a couple iterations of the name of the podcast. It first was called the Future of Work Podcast. Then I changed it to Great Leadership. And then I've been kind of trying to figure out the right mix. And we've landed on Future Ready Leadership and just kind of Future Ready branding. So it's worked out well. So I'm a fan. So obviously you've written a ton of books. Why in particular did you write this book on strategy?
A lot of people think they know what strategy is, but they might not. There are a lot of books that assert that they're about strategy, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're about tactics. They're about plans. Strategy is a philosophy. And I found that many people who came to me with a marketing problem actually had a strategy problem. People who came to me with a leadership problem actually had a strategy problem. Strategy is a philosophy of becoming, and we need to talk about it. We are in this changing time. Several change agents are transforming our world. And if you don't have a strategy, then you're going to be part of somebody else's.
I'm teaching my daughter how to play chess now. So she's 8 years old and she's competing in chess tournaments. And I play a lot of chess as well. And the whole thing in chess is the difference between strategy and tactics. And the way that a chess player views tactics are immediate things that you could do on the chessboard that result in some sort of a advantage, winning a piece, checkmate, sacrifice, whereas strategy is kind of the long-term plan that you're putting into place, which hopefully might lead to some tactics or to winning advantages over the long run. And one of the things that chess players struggle with the most is the strategy piece. It's the idea of like, when you've set up your pieces on the board and you have everything in your optimal position, well, now what? I've done everything. I've developed everything. My pieces are where they need to go. Now, how do I come up with the plan? And that's where chess players struggle with the most. Would you say that's similar in the business world? Like we're really good at kind of setting things up, getting things ready to go. But then after that, we're sort of like, well, we don't know what direction to take. We don't know how to think of the long-term plan.
Yeah. Managers want plans. Managers want checklists. They want instructions. A hardworking novice chess player will memorize 10 openings and be able to execute on them. But then when their opponent does the surprising thing, they have no idea what to do.
Yep.
And so, Roger Martin has pointed out strategic planning is an oxymoron. Planning implies if you do the steps, you will win. Strategy, on the other hand, has a range of possible outcomes. And we have to be ready for this might not work. We have to be ready for, I'm not exactly sure how the future will unfold, but it will probably rhyme with this. And so particularly successful people resist this because they don't want the world to change. And unsuccessful people are afraid of it because they're worried that if the world changes, they'll fail again.
Yeah.
And the way I view it is the world is going to change. In fact, this is as normal as it's ever going to be again. And that's a new opportunity to create value for people.
So in the business world, how would you define strategy versus tactics? That way, like how do people know where they're actually at if they're talking about tactics or strategy?
Strategy is 4 things woven together. It is seeing the systems that you live with. It is playing the games that are around you. It is empathy for the people you serve. And it is a respect and embrace of time because tomorrow is going to be different than today. So a strategy is I'm going to plant these seeds on this hill because 20 years from now, I need a forest.
Yeah.
Whereas a tactic is, I need a sharper shovel because this hole isn't deep enough.
Yeah. I like that vision. I like that analogy. I like that one a lot. So a couple minutes ago, you mentioned that strategy is really important now because there are a lot of change agents. There's just a lot of stuff happening. What are some of the big factors that you think leaders and business professionals in general need to be paying attention to as far as what those change agents are?
So an agent of change is something that impacts an entire system. And if you're newspapers 25 years ago, Craigslist is an agent of change because Craigslist shows up and steals the classifieds. Once the classifieds are gone, newspapers, many of them go from making a profit to losing money every day. So one shift to the system can change lots of things. And the two biggest change agents that I see of our time, I'll pick three. One is boomers are fading. We're disappearing. We took the world stage for 50 years, and now we're going away. Number two is artificial intelligence, which is the biggest shift to our world since electricity. And number three is climate. And those three things are going to change every system we know of. And if you're comfortable with the old system, you're going to have to shift because the new system is going to be different.
Yeah. Maybe we can unpack those a little bit. So let's start with boomers. Why is that such an important aspect? Is it because that we're seeing an aging workforce and we're seeing a lot of that institutional knowledge and expertise exit the workforce? Is that kind of the main driver there?
Well, culture is invented by systems to maintain stability. Culture is how they protect themselves. Boomers drove the culture. So you get in an elevator today, you're going to hear music from 1968. You're going to hear music from 1979. That was not true a couple generations ago, right? That the iconography, the movies we talk about, the stars we engage in, the business practices, they were all perfected and honed by people who were born between 1950 and 1965. And they stuck around longer than previous generations have stuck around. So when those fade away, a whole new generation comes along and says things like, I'd rather have a phone than a car. That's spectacular shift. So let's just talk about that for 1 second. What did Walt Disney do? Walt Disney looked at the invention of film and said, this is a change agent. And he went ahead and started making movies. And then he saw the invention of the car and he realized that would lead to amusement parks. Because you can't have an amusement park that's hard to get to if you have to walk there, right? Yeah. And so when you see these shifts coming, the third time he did it was with television. You see these shifts coming, you realize a little shift changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so when a whole generation says, I'd rather have a phone than a car, that means that people are going to start ordering in from Uber Eats instead of visiting a restaurant. It means all of these things start to shift. And if you're a leader, you shouldn't be surprised by that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the boomers, it seems like the big impact there is cultural. And by the way, some of the stuff I think we could argue is good, and some of the stuff is maybe not as good, or not. Organizations and leaders shouldn't adapt to every aspect of a new generation that enters the workforce.
Correct.
In other words.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I have no judgment about any of these.
Okay, yes. Okay, so that's the boomer side, kind of changing culture there, values, expectations. Climate was the third one. What was the second one that you said? AI.
Artificial
yes. Yeah, there's a lot. So I live in California, and I think even today, or it was fairly recently, Gavin Newsom just passed a law saying that you can no longer have deep fake AI-generated videos. And there's this whole, like, Elon Musk is arguing with Gavin Newsom online, and he put up a parody video, and he's saying, how can you make parody illegal? It's comedy, it's this and that. So there's a lot that's going on in the AI world. Even Hollywood, there was the big workers' strike, and a lot of employees in Hollywood want security, knowing that AI is not going to take away their jobs and write scripts. New York Times today, there was another article of 600 workers there are going on strike. They want assurances that AI is not going to take over their jobs. It's crazy stuff. And I know you're a big fan of Claude instead of ChatGPT. But why AI? What is the big impact there that you see? Because it can go in so many different directions.
Well, I'll say two things. Never in the history of technology has workers going on strike caused the technology to stop.
Yeah.
Number two, technology has always created more jobs than it has destroyed. So when the steam shovel came along, all the ditch diggers got put out of work, but it invented far more jobs than it destroyed. We have invented 6 billion jobs since 1960. Just we keep inventing them. So there will be jobs, but let's think about not what AI can do today, right? AI can write a mediocre Seth Godin blog post faster than I can. It doesn't. My blog posts are all by me, but you get the idea. That's not what AI is going to do going forward. Going forward, AI is going to transform the way all productive work is done, the same way electricity did. That imagine electricity just gets invented and the blacksmiths union has a strike saying we are going out on strike because we are opposed to electricity. Any business that said we are opposed to electricity disappeared because whole new businesses that were based on electricity arrived. Well, AI is here all the time, almost free, and gets better every day. So if you do a job that AI can do, your boss is going to hire AI to do it instead.
Yeah.
That's just true.
Yep.
That's so many jobs, but it's going to create all of these other opportunities that will transform education, that will transform production, that will transform marketing and consumption. Every single business I can think of, including farming, is going to be transformed by the fact that every device becomes very smart. That when you have a sprinkler head for every single one of the trees on your farm, and that sprinkler head knows a lot about the weather and the tree, it's going to do things differently. And that's going to transform what you grow, how you grow it, etc. Multiply that by every single sector.
I remember even when ATMs came about, there was this whole argument that bank tellers and banks were going to disappear. And in fact, we've seen a massive surge in banks and bank tellers. And yeah, that argument happens time again for literally every new piece of technology that comes out. And some of the stuff with AI is just wild that you're able to do. I talk to some companies now that are in the process. They want to create voice-enabled analysis where, as an HR executive, you can just ask your AI, how many employees are at the company? What's the engagement score on this team? Who's the best performing manager on this team? And so it's just fascinating to see the direction that we're going to go.
But Jacob, I just got to double down on this. Why can't I just ask the AI, please read the email of every single one of my employees?
Yeah.
And compare it to all the emails they sent last week. And please tell me what what's going on with motivation inside and what are people concerned about? Give me a summary, right? Yeah. I wouldn't trust a person to read everybody's email, but an AI doesn't know anything. So of course it can. And the sentiment analysis say, guess what? 2/3 of your employees are confused about this. You wouldn't have known that otherwise. I mean, that's just a massive game changer.
It is. It also requires a lot of trust because there have also been situations that I've talked to several HR executives where they rely on AI to predict what employee would succeed in a certain role. And so a few of these companies that I talked to, they're like, yeah, we used AI, we did all this analysis, we fed in all this data, and it told us that these 5 employees are going to be very successful in sales, for example. So we hired them, we put them in sales, they all failed miserably. So there's also something to be said about trusting AI. And I don't
trust it at all.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something, it is terrible at predicting the future.
Yes.
It is very good at understanding the past. So just like, when cars came out, the number of people who died was enormous.
Yep.
When the washing machine was invented, there were no electrical outlets. So you had to unscrew the light bulb in the living room and screw in the washing machine. And dozens of people died because the washing machine would rock back and forth and move when it was working, and it would wrap its cord around your neck. So all these bad things are going to happen. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
but I'm not in charge of AI coming or going. I'm just telling you change is here.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the coolest things actually about your career is the fact that you had the opportunity to work with Isaac Asimov. And we always talk about this when you come on the show because he's one of my favorite science fiction writers. And, you know, his character that he created, Harry Seldon in the Foundation series, is just, I think, the coolest character ever. And I still haven't seen, you know, what Apple TV did to Foundation was not good. And I'm still waiting
It's
for
unfilmable.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for a good version of that to come out. But if anybody hasn't read the book, I highly recommend it. But
Foundation is unfilmable, and so is Dune. They gave it a good shot, but it's not. You can't do it.
Yeah, and iRobot was fantastic. Will Smith, they turned it into some crazy psycho action movie. But the main character in Foundation, I think, is so interesting because Harry Seldon is this character who is, you know, the ultimate futurist, where he's able to bring in so many different pieces and sources of data and information that he's able to predict the future of the galactic empire on a grand scale. And I think a lot of what people are assuming you're going to be able to do is to bring in all these different sources of data and information and to be able to extrapolate that in the future. But as you've pointed out, AI is not very good at predicting stuff. So it's just kind of a very interesting challenge that I think we're going to be faced with.
Yes, well said.
And so do you think that the main impact, you're optimistic about AI. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are worried. You see some reports out there say, you know, 1 billion jobs, 200 million jobs are going to be replaced by AI. It sounds like you're on the optimistic side. You think we're going to see more jobs created in different areas than we will see replaced.
Given the choice in any situation between being an optimist and a pessimist, I find that being an optimist is more productive. And no one is asking me to decide.
Yeah.
What I do believe, based on my understanding and a lifetime of studying AI, is it's pretty unlikely that it will turn the world into a paperclip and destroy us all. I am way more worried about other things. And it is very likely that in the medium run, it will create far more opportunities than people can imagine.
I feel like you should tell people the paperclip story. Because I picked up on that reference, but I think a lot of people have no idea what that reference...
The short version is, like you, I've been reading science fiction my whole life. And a science fiction author wrote about this in the 60s. Imagine a very powerful computer that's goal-directed, following its creator's instructions. And the creator says, your job is to make more paperclips. And that's all it does, is it just keeps using its superpowers to capture more and more resources to make more and more paperclips until finally there's nothing left but paperclips.
Yeah, and it extrapolates everything, and it figures out that there's iron in human blood, and it starts killing human beings. You know, it's funny, speaking of AI, I actually remember seeing, there were a couple of job postings online of ChatGPT or AI prompt creators. And I think the salaries were something like $200,000 for you to be able to give AI prompts that would give the best information that a company can use. So it's just an example that you can see that, we have things like ChatGPT and Claude, but you still have to know how to ask it the right questions, what information to feed it. And that, I think, is going to turn into a whole separate industry figuring out what to do. And we're starting to see it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're a freelancer, go get good at one of these things and then start an Upwork account where you're doing human work 25 times faster, but charging at human rates. You'll do fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, getting back to the idea of actually the third one, you mentioned climate. I want to make sure
this is the biggest one. Within 5 years, 15 million people are going to be climate refugees. They'll have lost their homes. They will be on boats. They will have nowhere to go. Within 20 years, everything we buy and sell will be impacted by its carbon embodiment. That we've been coasting for a long time on cheap fuel, and we've been subsidizing cheap fuel. All of us are paying for it, and that's going to stop. And organizations that are resilient and ready for that are going to do great. And the organizations that are dependent on the status quo are really going to suffer.
Yeah, this is a huge, even in the upcoming elections that we have, this is a huge debate. You see both sides of it. You see people like, Bill Gates, who are very much on the pro-climate emergency side. And then you see so many people as well on the opposite side. People like Bjorn Lundberg, he wrote that book, False Alarm. I don't know if you've read it. So
I know Bjorn.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the different debates that we have about all these different issues that are out there.
There are some things that are, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No, go ahead.
you cannot be an honest, rational broker and deny that the climate is changing. You can have some very useful conversations about what we should do about it, but there aren't two sides to the debate about whether the climate is changing.
Yeah.
There's just people who would like to have a fight and be oppositional, but they're not having a thoughtful, honest contribution to what's going on.
Are you a chief people officer or a chief human resource officer that is responsible for the future of work and employee experience? If so, then you're going to want to check out futureofworkleaders.com. It's a new global community that I am putting together of the world's top people leaders from brands including Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Tractor Supply, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of others. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and again, if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. And I think you're right. Even I think the people that are more on the contrary side, I think everybody would agree that there is change. I think to your point, there's just debate around why is the change happening? What is the best thing that we should do about the change? But I think even people like Bjorn would argue that, as far as I know, I don't think he argues that it's not changing. I think he's just arguing, different reasons for why it's changing and what to do. But every organization, you go on their like career and their corporate pages, so many of them are talking about sustainability. So many of them are talking about these issues. And you're right. And it also seems like a lot of Gen Z, Gen Alpha, this is a big concern for them as well. So it's a huge topic of conversation for so many. So getting back to the strategy side, what do leaders get wrong most when it comes to strategy? Because in chess, there's a saying that having a bad strategy is better than not having a strategy at all. I'm not sure if you would agree that that applies to the business world as well, but where are the mistakes that we see?
The biggest mistake is assuming that your list of tactics and plans is your strategy. It's not. That a strategy isn't something a committee carefully polishes up, filled with buzzwords that you put on the side of the elevator. Strategy is your compass, the thing that you're betting on that the system is going to push forward. So a couple examples. Howard Schultz gets to Starbucks. At the time, there were 2 Starbucks stores, and Starbucks did not sell coffee. They only sold coffee beans and tea. And he had been to Italy, and he had seen what happened in the little cafes. And he said, our strategy is as follows. Our strategy is to create a luxury brand where upper and middle income people can go from pre-caffeinated to caffeinated while connecting with others. Everything they've done for the last 30 years has been tactics to support that. So once you don't need to change your strategy, you can trust people in the organization to find new tactics, right? Howard doesn't need to be in the meeting about the pumpkin frappuccino. That's a tactic, as long as people understand the strategy. So under Steve Ballmer, Microsoft had no strategy. Under Steve Ballmer, they were just, we're going to try really, really hard and we have tactics. And he was one of the worst performing CEOs in recorded history as a result.
Yeah.
And Satya Nadella shows up and he says, we understand a couple things. One, we understand that investing in really smart programmers and their tools over time is going to pay off. And number 2, as a result of that, he said, we think breakthroughs like AI can be amplified by an organization like ours. That's it. That's their whole strategy. And you just keep repeating that and repeating that and repeating that with lots of different tactics, you'll do fine. And the challenge when the world changes is if you don't have a strategy, you get paralyzed. So I was at Yahoo in 1999. They did not invite me to this meeting, but they had a meeting where they had a chance to buy Google for $10 million.
Ooh.
Not 10 billion, 10 million. And instead they said, nah, we'll just spend the money to make Yahoo Kids better.
That's
And
rough.
go back 100 years. Western Union had the chance to buy AT&T for not very much. And they said, nah, we'll just make better telegrams. Because when an organization gets hung up on polishing their tactics to make them more convenient and efficient, they forget that they need to think about their strategy.
Yeah, I think another example we keep hearing about is the Netflix and Blockbuster one too.
Yes, well, I have a Netflix story in the book. Here's the day that Netflix became Netflix. They had won the DVD wars. Blockbuster was suffering. Blockbuster was going to go away. 100% of Netflix profit came from renting DVDs.
Mm-hmm.
And Reed and Ted, the two people who ran the organization, decided when they saw streaming coming, that streaming, which at the time was just YouTube, was a change agent. It was going to transform the way people consumed media. So they chose to build a streaming division. But the thing they did that was so critical is that all the meetings leading up to it, no one from the DVD division was allowed to come. They were not invited to the meetings, because if they invited the DVD people who had that much power and that much at stake, they would have kept averaging down and watering down the streaming option. Instead, they said, how do we build a streaming business that will put our DVD business out of business? And committing to a strategy is why you don't want to have a committee do it.
Yeah. There was also that other company. I can't remember what it was called. Do you remember the kiosks? What was it called? Like Red something?
Red something. Red box.
Red envelope
whatever,
or red. Yeah. And they also had a similar kind of approach. I wonder, I mean, I don't know what happened to them. I think they're bankrupt. But they were also, I mean, they were catching up for a little while, because you could go to any supermarket, you can go to any major establishment, and they would have all the major titles in there. You don't need to go to the store. You could just check it out and then return it there. And for a while, they were doing well too. And I think they also totally just vanished and disappeared.
Well, yeah, their strategy was, we're just like Netflix, but more convenient.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say. We're like Netflix, but more convenient. But if Netflix switches their strategy, how can you be more convenient than all these movies streaming? You can't. So you need a different theory, a different game to play going forward.
So how do you know if your strategy is going in the right direction? Because, we talked about kind of what the strategy is, but, I know we keep talking about chess, but even in chess, there are lots of times where you have a strategy and it's wrong. You end up losing the game. You miscalculated something. You saw something that you thought was there and it wasn't. So as a leader, if you're putting together a strategy, are there signs or things that you pay attention to help you know if you're moving in the right direction?
Okay, so the way you can tell if someone's a good surfer is they pick good waves. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. If you pick bad waves, you're not going to be able to surf very well. And once a surfer is on a wave, they have decisions to make. And they involve go left, go right, or give up on this wave and go get another one. And the same thing is true here. That if it's not getting better, but other people are finding traction, you need to say, well, what assets am I building? And is building these assets, in the case of chess, if I'm strengthening my rooks and bishops on the king side, is it getting me closer to what I seek? And if it's not, you got to ask, what's going to change that will make it worthwhile? And if not, get off that wave and go look for another one.
You sound like you play chess.
I play so badly. My weak parts are my open, my mid game, and my end game.
I was going to say, because you got like all the terminology and stuff down.
Oh, I've been a game designer since 1976.
Okay.
And chess is as pure a game as there is. My problem, so one of the reasons the Russians dominated chess for so long is they had a library in Moscow that had every single game chronicled. And players from outside the Soviet Union didn't have access to it. So the people who were playing at the highest level had seen all the games that came before. And I was on the chess team in high school. And the reason I stopped was players who were better than me had memorized stuff.
Yeah.
They knew that. And I just found that so uninteresting, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's the challenging part of chess today. Like the openings, some of these, there's so many openings and you can just memorize 10, 15, 20 moves. Actually, the Chess Olympiad is going on right now. I don't know if you're following it, but all the teams, all the countries from around the world are competing. United States is not doing great. I think we're like in third or fourth. But yeah, it's very interesting how technology has impacted even the world of chess, to go from having books to now having a database where literally every game that
Right.
any grandmaster has ever played
Exactly.
is categorized and archived. And it kind of some would argue that it removes a little bit of the beauty from the game because it's very hard to develop novel concepts and ideas. But then other people will say, well, it's just a different type of chess. So it's...
Well, speaking of different kinds of chess, I know we're off the topic. I'm creating a game with a company called Puzzmo. And if you go to Puzzmo.com, there's some very cool games there. But one of the games, the one I play the most often, is called Really Bad Chess. And it's a chess game against a computer, but all the pieces are in the wrong place.
Oh,
and
I see it here.
And you have like 4 queens or 3 bishops. And so there's no point in memorizing anything because it's different every single time.
Yeah, I see it here. It reminds me a lot of Chess 960, where similar idea, but the pieces on the back ranked are rotated in a different way. Yeah, this seems like very intense because I just clicked on one of them and I have like 4 queens, 4 bishops, 3 knights, actually 7 bishops, no pawns on the board whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, that would make things interesting for sure. So speaking of strategy, the other big challenge that I think a lot of executives have, and I hear this a lot, I'm sure you do as well, is how do I balance the short term with the long term? I have short-term pressures. I have quarterly numbers that I need to meet. But at the same time, I have to think long-term, 3, 4, 5 years down the road about what the company is going to be. So how do you balance those two things when it comes to strategy?
I'm having trouble feeling badly for the CEOs who make $40 million a year who have that problem, but that's the hard part of their job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? And the stock market is an idiot. The stock market keeps driving as fast as it can and slamming into the wall. And, I saw what happened at Yahoo when I was there. I saw what happened at General Electric. I saw what happened at Microsoft. It happens to companies that everyone says are great, and then they're not. No. Because when you have 5,000 employees who have stock options, and you're sitting in a meeting trying to decide to do something important that's going to make your stock go down in the short run, there's a lot of people who want you to do the short run thing.
Yeah.
And, I sat with Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo, and I said, Jerry, here's what I want to do. Just give me 2 people. I'm going to go to a little rundown office across the street, and I will build the companies that you're busy out acquiring for a fortune, but you'll own them already, right? Let's build a skunk works to innovate into the future. And he turned to me and he said, Seth, if I let you do that, everyone would want to do that. Which was the dumbest reason I have ever heard to not think about the future. The fact is, the future is an undiscovered, unvisited city, but we know what it looks like a little bit from a distance. And we have to make assertions and we have to make bets. Those bets are tiny compared to how much it costs to have a fleet of private jets. They're tiny. The real problem isn't quarterly earnings. It's your ego. That you're hesitant to do this because you don't want to be wrong. And, in 2000, 24 years ago, Walmart hired me to give a speech in Bentonville, Arkansas. Think about how long ago that was. And I show up, this is their digital division, there's 400 people there, and they had a banner across the room that said, you can't out Amazon Amazon. 24 years ago, they gave up.
That's what the banner said at Walmart?
Yep.
Wow.
Because what they were saying to their crew is, look, this is the most profitable retail business in the history of the world. Don't get distracted. We're not prepared to invest what it will take to catch up to this tiny little company that sells stuff online. We got time. And over the 20 years plus, they made plenty of profit by sticking to their stores. But the mistake they made was saying, why don't we just open an outlet in Santa Clara, put 20 people there, let's lose $10 million a year doing it, And if we're wrong, we're wrong. But it's $10 million. But instead, they couldn't be wrong. And so they doubled down on what they were good at, which in the short run is a brilliant strategy. But sooner or later, it gets you in trouble.
Well, it's actually interesting because I can't remember where Walmart is now, but I think they have done a pretty good job, probably not quite at Amazon's level yet, but I think Walmart is still the world's largest employer.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm saying if I was a shareholder, I would approve of this. I have told the story for a long time as a good thing. But now that it's 25 years later, it's starting to become a bad thing.
Yes, they could have done a lot more had they started.
Because, and Amazon's been turning a wheel and turning a wheel and turning a wheel. And soon, Amazon's put a whole bunch of small businesses out of business, just like Walmart did.
Yep.
But who's left, right? They got to start going after Target and Walmart, and they will.
Yeah, the heavyweights in there. So how do you figure out what's realistic versus not realistic when it comes to strategy? Because to your point, right? I mean, somebody's sitting in a room making a decision and they're thinking like, yeah, we could go after Amazon or not. Yeah, we could go after Blockbuster or not. Like, how do you figure out what is just pie in the sky, unrealistic versus, wow, we got an actual shot at this?
So most people listening to this have been on a camping trip. And the lesson is super simple and very hard for kids to learn. Don't try to build a fire with logs bigger than your kindling. If you don't have enough kindling, you can't light that log on fire. And so what we're looking for are, what are your resources? What can you afford to be wrong about? Where can you lean in 100%? If you have to go after strategy 40%, complaining the whole time you don't have time or money, you're going to fail. Pick a smaller thing. And, in the climate thing, I worked for a year and a half as a full-time volunteer on the Carbon Almanac. And a lot of people who see the climate problem say, we got to fix everything all at once. This is the biggest problem of our life. And I would say things like, if you and 20 parents got together, you could make it so that your high school cafeteria had Meatless Monday. And if you could get the cafeteria to have Meatless Monday, it would work. And then you could have Meatless Wednesday. And then you could teach people at other high schools how to do the same thing. And then you have enough kindling to do that. You don't have enough kindling to get JP Morgan to change its investment strategy. So we need to plant the seeds so that a year or 2 years or 5 years from now, we're glad we did.
Would you say it's fair then to say that you should go in, if you can afford to be wrong, you should go into whatever that is if you can afford to be wrong? Is that fair kind of?
I wouldn't say should.
Okay.
I would say reject any strategy where you can't afford to be wrong.
Okay. Reject any strategy where you can't. Yeah, that makes sense. You also mentioned this role of foresight. We talked about Harry Seldon and Isaac Asimov. What role does foresight play in strategy? Because and also not just the role that foresight plays, but how far should organizations be thinking about or looking? Because there used to be a time where companies would create 10-year plans, 5-year plans. A lot of people now say that's useless to do because you can barely see what's going to happen at the end of the year. So is foresight important? And then how do you integrate foresight into the way that you think about strategy?
So I'm talking to you less than a mile from the Hudson River. The Hudson River is a mighty river, goes 12 hours in one direction, turns around and goes 12 hours in the other. But most of the time when you look at it, it looks like a lake. There are no waves on it. What's the difference between a lake and a river? The difference is a river has a current. And so the foresight that's required is to make an assertion about the current. So 20 years ago, you could state, I believe that every day people are going to spend a little bit more time and do a little bit more on the internet. That's the current. That anybody who is fighting against that and insisting that people spend more time sitting quietly, isolated from others, reading a paper book, I don't know if that's good foresight. I think that the prediction that more and more people are going to switch to audiobooks made a lot of sense when Don Katz made it, right? And Don, by himself, transformed the audiobook industry because he said the chances that more people will be wearing headphones tomorrow is very high. The chances that people will be busier tomorrow, very high. This is the current. And if you have a choice, paddle with the current, not against it. If it's important, realize you're paddling against the current and plan for that.
Okay. And maybe one more question before we get to the last part of the podcast on kind of future-ready leadership actions that people can take. Do you have any current examples or leaders that you think are doing a fairly good job when it comes to strategy? Like when you look at the business world in general, who do you think out there is got...
Right. So if I pick somebody, they're cursed. They're going to get hit by an asteroid or something. So I generally don't do that. What I would say is look for organizations that are quietly becoming more resilient. Not people who are bragging on stage, but who are quietly getting ready for a world that's going to play by different rules.
That's an interesting thing to pay attention to. And I guess you could do that by just seeing the moves that they're making, the investments that they're making. Some of the and on LinkedIn especially, you could see some of the things that CEOs talk about, the strategies. Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about how to put some of these things into action. And I thought we could start off with, where do you begin when it comes to developing a strategy? So let's say a leader is listening and watching this. They know what the component of a strategy is, and they're thinking, okay, I'm ready to put something down together. Where do I begin? All right, everybody, my conversation with Seth Godin continues for premium subscribers of Future Ready Leadership Plus, only available on Apple Podcasts. And in this bonus conversation, Seth and I dive a little bit deeper into the concept of strategy. Specifically, we go over how to develop a strategy, the questions that you should be asking, where to begin, how to put together your team, and how to actually take that strategy that you put together and implement it. Again, only available for premium subscribers. And if you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, you'll get one of these bonus episodes every week, as well as ad-free listening. That's right. Everybody hates ads. I hate ads, but you know what? At the end of the day, they help make shows like this possible. So if you want to remove those ads, you can subscribe there. It's a couple bucks a month. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. Go to thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. That's where I send out these podcasts. We do whole articles about them. We put transcripts in there, all sorts of other cool stuff. And lastly, if you get a couple seconds, please forward this episode to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. And if you also get a couple more seconds after that and decide to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, I would greatly appreciate it, as would my team. Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching, for listening. I'll see you next time.